And welcome inside another edition of Land of 10 Live. Why do we look surprised to be here? This is the moment we're waiting for. We'll talk about our state of the program with Michigan, but I'm happy to be alongside 1997 national champion Chris Howard. As always, Chris, how you doing?
I'm good, Sam. How about yourself, man?
I'm doing all right. So much for us to cover over the course of the next 30 minutes, and we look forward to doing that with you guys as well, the trusty laptop over here on my side. So remember to check us out on our Land of 10 Facebook page. Here's what we've got coming up today on the program. We will run through our quick slants and talk about some more coaching changes in the Big Ten. The assistant coaches have been a key topic this offseason for a lot of schools. Michigan and Ohio State both back in the news this week as it comes to their assistant coaching hires and who they might hire. So we'll spend some time on that. Speaking of Michigan, I mentioned right at the top of the program, it will be our look at the Michigan Wolverines as our State of the Program series continues. We'll talk about just how important year 4 under Jim Harbaugh is for Chris's Maize and Blue. And Tyler Donahue will make his weekly appearance, it seems like, as he recaps National Signing Day. Who are the winners and losers in the Big Ten? I have a feeling Michigan is going to figure into that conversation as well. And remember that we will look forward to some viewer engagement with y'all on our Land of 10 Facebook page. We'll let you know who's coming up on next week's State of the Program as well. But Chris, let's start things right there on our quick slants. We'll spend some time talking about that coaching moves in the offseason for the Big Ten. But first off, let's start with National Signing Day. Who are the winners and losers as we look at things for the Big Ten?
Well, I think if we're talking about winners, you obviously got to talk about Ohio State and Urban Meyer. What he's been able to do for that program has just been unbelievable. I mean, the last few recruiting classes that he's put together has just been astounding. I mean, 5-star after 5-star, 4-star after 4-star. I mean, everyone that they've targeted, they've hit. And one of the more impressive things that they've done is they've been able to not only recruit the state of Ohio really well, but they've been able to go in other states and grab #1 prospects out of those states as well. And that's really important when you talk about Ohio State and continuing their dominance in the Big Ten. Also, James Franklin, he's been recruiting extremely well. He's known for being a really good recruiter. He's done extremely well for Penn State. And of course, the new addition to the Big Ten, Scott Frost. He's been on a tear lately. He's been hitting Florida really hard, bringing in a lot of guys from Florida, recruiting that state really well. And of course, when we talk about losers, I think we got to talk about my Michigan Wolverines, Jim Harbaugh. He brought in a 21st ranked recruiting class, 3rd ranked recruiting class in the Big Ten. Obviously not what they wanted, but I think they've got some of the guys that they targeted. They got Mustafa Muhammad, the tight end that they wanted, Miles Sims out of Georgia. So they've got some guys that they wanted to bring in, but obviously they missed out on a lot of top targets. Tyler Friday, Petit Ferrer, both guys who ended up going to Ohio State, which really hurts. But listen, it's got to get better, and unfortunately for Michigan, it's a continued trend going downward.
Well, I mean, those are pretty significant comments, and I look forward to exploring them with you more in just a few minutes here when we get to our look at the state of the program. And we'll get some insight as well from Tyler Donahue to find out what happened with Otis Reese and some of the other misses that Michigan had. But I do agree with you about the big winners. Ohio State, obviously, and Penn State, a pretty darn good year under James Franklin, building off the on-the-field success. Speaking of the Michigan Wolverines, they're in the news as it comes to this coaching business as well with these assistant coaches. The rumor this week in the Big Ten is that Jim McElwain, former head coach at Florida, could be joining Michigan as an offensive assistant. What kind of fit would that be for the Maize and Blue?
Well, listen, Jim McElwain, he had a lot of success at Colorado State, which allowed him to get the job at Florida. Now, obviously, things didn't work out with Jim McElwain at Florida, but he's still a very good offensive coach. Spent some time at Florida under Urban Meyer, under that regime. So he's a really great offensive mind. Also, Cameron, I hear he's in the running as well. But I think Jim McElwain is probably the guy that they really want. And right now with Michigan, I mean, you've seen a lot of shifting and moving within this offensive staff, and I think that's because when you look at what happened this past season with 9 offensive passing touchdowns, obviously you need to be able to go in there and shuffle some things around to make some changes, because as it stands right now, the offensive production from the quarterback position has been dire, and that's been really the key to why Michigan has not had a successful season. So I think you're going to see some more changes. I think you're going to see some titles change as well within the program. So we'll see what happens, but I think this could be a good move for Michigan.
Well, since we are spending more time on Michigan today as our State of the Program featured school, I'll go ahead with a follow-up for you on Jim McElwain. Is it just low-hanging fruit to take the easy comment and say, well, wait a minute, when he was last a head coach at Florida, these same issues about offensive production that are bothering Michigan and Jim Harbaugh right now bother Jim McElwain at Florida? What better sample is there than the litmus test that he gave you on the field at Florida, and it didn't translate?
Well, I think if you're Jim Harbaugh, what you're trying to really do is you're trying to assess your offensive game planning room. You're trying to add more smart minds to that room. I'm smart enough to know that I'm not the smartest guy in the room, so I always surround myself by smarter people. And so I think that's the initiative that Jim Harbaugh is taking. He's looking at guys that can come in and help his offensive staff. No, it didn't work out with Jim McElwain in Florida, but that does not wash away his entire career as an offensive mind, as an offensive genius. So you want him to come in, you want him to bring in his mind, his tools, and hopefully you can get the offensive going in the right direction.
All right, so there's offense. Let's talk about defense. You got yin and yang in Michigan and Ohio State, and it's hard to figure out who's staying and who's going with the New England Patriots, but I guess Greg Schiano is not going to the Patriots, just like Josh McDaniels is not leaving the Patriots, and Greg Schiano staying at Ohio State then. Pretty big coup for Ohio State for the assistant coaches, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that they didn't lose this offseason when you think about Larry Johnson Sr. as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, they did lose Kerry Combs to the NFL, but like you said, a major coup for them to be able to keep Greg Schiano. But I think that's really only for 1 year. I think if he can have another successful season at Ohio State, put another guy as a Big Ten defensive player into the NFL under his control, I think there are more opportunities for him to have better options when he's ready to leave Ohio State. But again, Greg Schiano staying at Ohio State does nothing but help Ohio State in the long run.
Well, I'll make you suffer no longer than that talking about Ohio State on a day that we're supposed to talk about the Michigan Wolverines. I will remind you, though, that you're watching Land of 10 live here on our Land of 10 Facebook page. You can check us out each Tuesday, 6 o'clock Eastern and 5 o'clock Central, or on demand anytime on our Facebook page. So Land of 10 Live continues. We will talk now about the state of the program for the Michigan Wolverines. I guess, Chris, when you look at this now, it's the 4th year under Jim Harbaugh. Just how important is this season to determining the overall state of the program for Michigan?
We know, Sam, it's extremely important because, you know, Jim Harbaugh came into Michigan riding a tidal wave of momentum, right? You had a lot of things happening in the offseason with him challenging the NCAA, with satellite camps, the Jordan brand, a lot of momentum, and that resulted in 10 win seasons, right? Resulted in back-to-back 10-win seasons. On top of that, he was able to put together 2 top 10 recruiting classes, and that was all because of momentum and winning games, and also controlling the narrative. But now the narrative has changed, and now you're hearing rumors of issues between coaching staff and coaching members. All these sort of things are starting to bubble up now. So this year 4, is super important for Jim Harbaugh to change the narrative, to get the team back on track, get the program back on track, winning games and beating rivals. That's the name of the game. That's what's going to help him control the narrative going into 2018.
Well, I guess as you continue to look at Michigan and kind of some of the negative momentum that we're talking about, you just touched on it as it comes to recruiting. So let's put that out in the open here in the state of the program. What does it say that this is such an important year then? And then all of a sudden Jim Harbaugh turns in, again, it's all relative, but his worst recruiting ranked class, his worst class ranking in recruiting since he's been on the job.
Well, that's a direct result of losing. You know, that's a direct result of not winning on the field. I mean, at the end of the day, you can have a coach like Jim Harbaugh, but recruits still want to see success. They want to still see development. And if you look at where Harbaugh really missed on his recruits, right? You missed on the offensive line. You've been missing on a number of offensive tackles. Well, that's been the one area on the offensive line that's been the least developed. And so you're not going to attract major talent if you're not showing that you can develop the kids that you have. So for Jim Harbaugh, again, when you put together an 8-5 season, you're going to have these type of results. But for 2017, the 2018 recruiting class, that was all about building depth. The guys that came in on the 2016, 2017 class, those are the guys that are responsible for turning around the program, not necessarily guys that committed in 2018 recruiting class.
Let's break down some of the issues kind of from position groups or from larger strokes, I guess I would say. When we talk about offense, and you mentioned the statistic with the 9 passing touchdowns a year ago, when you look at the offensive state of the program for the Michigan Wolverines right now, is it fair to say maybe that they never had the personnel, or at least on a consistent basis, at the quarterback position, and maybe now, at least if Shea Patterson is granted eligibility to play this season by the NCAA, that would no longer be part of the mix, that now they do have a Michigan caliber quarterback under center?
Oh, well, again, I think that depends on if Shea Patterson is eligible and he is capable of coming in. But Shea Patterson is going to need help. He's going to need help from his offensive line. He's going to need help from his wide receivers, a young wide receiver group at that. He's going to need help from all those guys in order for him to elevate his game. The guys around him need to elevate their game and start being the players that we've seen in the past. And then that will help alleviate some of the stress that Shea Patterson will find himself under. Michigan needs to get the run game going. They need receivers to be consistent in their route running, be consistent in catching the passes. And that will help Shea Patterson. Hopefully, if Shea Patterson is a quarterback, that'll help Shea Patterson moving forward. But listen, Michigan, from an offensive standpoint, offensive line has been the key. In every Michigan loss that Michigan had in the 2017 season, Michigan rushed for 2.1 yards a carry, and that's not good enough against good teams. So if the Michigan, as the old saying goes, as the offensive line goes, so will the team. If Michigan correct the mistakes on the offensive line, Michigan will be fine.
All right, well, I guess I'll throw the inverse of the old saying out to you. If it's not the Jims and the Joes, maybe it's the X's and the O's. A whole lot of changeover on the coaching staff for Michigan on the offensive side of the ball. Tim Drevno, Pep Hamilton, those were the guys that were kind of the brain trust offensively at the outset for Jim Harbaugh, but now moving in a little bit of a different direction in the coaching staff offensively as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we talked about this before, whether or not Pep Hamilton and Tim Drevno were a good combination of working together. And one thing that I've seen, I read an article recently by Sam Webb at the Michigan Insider. He did an interview with Pep Hamilton talking about that. And he talked about the brain trust coming together and formulating a game plan. But at the end of the day, all the game plan also goes through Jim Harbaugh, and Jim Harbaugh is responsible for calling the plays. So we can't really point the finger to Drevno and Harbaugh, because Jim Harbaugh is the guy who, at the end of the day, decides what plays are going to run and what plays are going to be called. But players also have to execute. But the one thing that I will say that I'm really surprised about is Michigan's offensive inability to out-scheme other teams. Because if you're lacking deficiency on the offensive line, then you better be good at scheming against really good teams. And that was one of the really disappointing things in the season, that I didn't see Michigan out-scheming guys.
Well, a couple of thoughts from my perspective on this. First of all, you and I spent a lot of time. I was at the Michigan-Ohio State game, and we were texting back and forth when we watched it. Through the first 3 quarters of that game, and maybe for the entirety of the game, when you look at how Michigan's season went, it was the best 60 minutes of football they played. Absolutely. Despite the fact they didn't win the game. But in the first half especially, I thought Michigan's coaching and play calling was excellent, and unfortunately some of the times through John O'Corn or whatever the case might have been, they just weren't able to execute those plays perfectly, but the plays were right there. I guess the question becomes, is Michigan, with the personnel that they have right now, with the coaching staff that they have right now, primed to be Michigan again offensively? Are they back?
I don't know if I would say that they're back, but I do think they have the ability to compete with anyone in the Big Ten. They have the personnel, they have the talent, they're there. If you go back and you look at the Ohio State game, there were plays there to be made, but it all resulted in, John O'Corn, the quarterback position, not being able to make those plays. So again, if you go back and you look at the Ohio State game, excellent game that was called. The scheme was perfect. There were plays to be made. Unfortunately, at the quarterback position, we just weren't able to make those plays. So again, it goes back to like you said, having the personnel. Are they back? I'm not ready to say that yet, but if Michigan can get back to being Michigan, that means controlling the line of scrimmage, making plays when they have to, then they can compete with anybody in the Big Ten.
All right, so we'll get to Tyler Donahue in just one second, but let me throw this out there as well. We always appreciate the viewer engagement there on our Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page. Nate Gettleman asks, how many wins does Michigan need for Jim Harbaugh to keep his job security? I don't think we're there right now, but I'll tell you this, when I was in Ann Arbor for that game, the common sentiment was we're paying a lot of money to lose 5 football games. Now, at that time, it was the 4th loss, and then we know South Carolina in the bowl game. Does it start to reflect on how good of a fit it is for Harbaugh and Michigan if they don't win a certain number of games this year? And if so, how many would that be?
I think, Michigan has to get up there to around 10 wins. I think Michigan needs to win 10 games in 2018. But again, if we're talking about Harbaugh in the hot seat and Harbaugh being a good match for Michigan and when they're going to pull the plug on the Harbaugh experiment, that train is nowhere near the station. I can assure you that. Listen. Most pundits felt that Michigan would probably go 8-5. Guess what? Michigan went 8-5 this season. Those guys actually knew what they were talking about, despite what expectations were. Michigan was probably overranked and probably overrated. So, a lot of people talked about youth on the team. At times, that youth showed up. So you can't really discount the youth. You can't really discount, of course, the instability with coaching, not really knowing, having an identity. Wilton Speight going down, Tariq Black going down. Then you're losing Brandon Peters for an extended period of time. So a lot of things happened. It was a perfect storm of events for Michigan to kind of have the season that they had.
All right, that's our look at the state of the program in Michigan. We'll continue it with Tyler, but I do want to remind you, you're watching Atlanta 10 Live right here on the Atlanta 10 Facebook page. Join us every Tuesday, 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, or on demand anytime. And now Tyler will join us to talk about National Signing Day as a whole. But Tyler, let's start with Michigan. What's the buzz about Michigan's 2018 recruiting class? That's not the type of national ranking or even ranking within the Big Ten that a lot of Michigan fans are expecting out of their program.
Hey, fellas. Yeah, this is obviously kind of a sour taste in the mouth of Michigan fans last Wednesday with signing day. You don't close with some of the big fish out there. You lose Otis Reese, who was, your one top 100 recruit. He ends up joining that crazy class they put together down in Georgia. So for Michigan right now, we've talked about it recently during the past few weeks, just don't have that momentum. They were arguably the team that carried the most positive momentum in the 2016 recruiting trail, and that was after, a very strong season for Jim Harbaugh. They were coming off a college football championship or even a Big Ten championship, and they had a lot of goodwill built up with recruits. They brought in a top 5 class, and now here they are 2 years later landing outside of the top 20. We said, where are the signature wins? Where are those emphatic victories where you say, wow, that's one that Harbaugh can put a feather in his cap for? Been a little while for that, and that adds up. The perception adds up. There is a cool factor involved with recruiting, and Michigan will always be cool. And they got the Jordan logo. Jim Harbaugh is a household name in football. They've got a ton of history. Chris knows better than anybody else. But right now, these kids who are 16, 17, they don't know a ton about that old history. And what they know from recent history is, Jim Harbaugh, exciting, eccentric, but not a lot of proof in the pudding the last couple of years when these kids tune in for big games against Penn State or Michigan State or Ohio State, of course. And I think that starts that up. And I don't think we thought it would be this impactful on the recruiting trail, but to come away with no one in the top 100, that's very uncharacteristic for Jim Harbaugh.
Tyler, thanks for joining us, man. I want to talk to you a little bit about Joe Milton because we've always been talking about the quarterback position. Obviously, you bring in a guy like Joe Milton, 6'4", 220-plus pounds out of Florida. What does Joe bring to the table that other quarterbacks in his class don't have?
Well, I think that we see a lot of quarterbacks who can get around and they're 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", Shea Patterson, Tate Martell kind of guys. But Joe Milton, this guy is very much in the 6'5", 6'6" range. He brings that size that maybe a Dylan McCaffrey has, but I think he has more athleticism. Ultimately, though, I think with Joe Milton, I think there are some mechanical issues that are going to need to be addressed. This is a guy that I think can get a little errant downfield, but he can put a lot of zip on that football. And he's coming in to join a really interesting quarterback group. We don't know what's going to happen with Shea Patterson, but I can tell you that Brandon Peters and McCaffrey were two of the top quarterbacks I personally scouted, the last couple of years. You throw Joe Milton in the mix now. It's going to be really interesting. He's going to have time to develop. He's going to have time to be groomed. I just kind of wonder with this quarterback group as a whole if someone's going to get nudged out eventually.
Tyler, we always appreciate you, like Chris said, and he won't ask you the Ohio State question, but I'll do it. I'll talk to you about the Buckeyes and like to get your take on them. How close were they to having the #1 overall class compared to Georgia, and how did Georgia slip ahead of them, and how much impact do you think this class is going to have on the Ohio State program?
Yeah, well, it's going to have a huge impact on Ohio State, but, I mean, how close were they? They were pretty razor thin. I mean, it was down to the wire, trying to see where Otis Reese would go. He goes to Georgia. Bulldogs pick up a couple of the guys at the wire. And regardless of what Ohio State did, Georgia put together an all-time class down there for their program with Kirby Smart coming off a breakout year. But for Urban Meyer, I mean, it's funny. Back in 2014, he admitted, he said, he hears people say that recruiting rankings aren't important. And he said, as long as you're keeping score, we're going to try to win. So he is somebody who's going to keep an eye on those rankings. They finished second. It's the 6th time Urban Meyer has put a team top 2 in recruiting rankings since he went to Florida. He's never finished lower than number 7 overall since 2006. In this class in particular, you look at it, 13 top 100 overall prospects. He does certainly say that Michigan didn't get any of those kind of guys. Penn State got 6, and the rest of the Big Ten got a combined 0 top 100 prospects. So you look at the balance of income and talent for the Big Ten, it leans heavily towards the reigning conference champions right now. They missed on Rasheed Walker. Penn State ends up getting him, but they end up getting a 5-star offensive tackle on signing day, Nicholas Petit-Frere. They beat out Notre Dame, Florida, Michigan. And then Javonte Jean-Baptiste, it really seemed like things were trending towards Nebraska, and Ohio State puts that in reverse, ends up bringing in the 4-star linebacker from New Jersey, and they reinforce things across the roster. It just doesn't seem to matter if they lose guys early to the NFL, much like in Alabama. Not many coaches can do that. There might only be 2 with Nick Saban and Urban Meyer, where year after year, it is absolutely zero surprise to see them sign this kind of class.
Tyler, you talked a little bit about Penn State, and James Franklin. I mean, he's known for being just an outstanding, aggressive recruiter. What is it about James Franklin that allows him to go and be able to compete with not just only the Urban Meyers, but the Nick Sabans? I mean, he's done it quickly. What is it about James Franklin that's resonating with these top athletes?
He has always had that engaging personality. That level of confidence. He brought that up from SEC country with him, and from his playing career. Just somebody that has that swagger, as you might say. The last few years, he's had to point towards 7 and 6 seasons. Now he's got back-to-back 11-win seasons. I think now, rather than selling a vision, he is selling a foundation that's already there. He is saying, hey, we've been knocking on the door of these college football playoffs back-to-back years. We need you to help us push through that door. And I think he does a great job really taking the lead on as many recruitments as he can. He is the guy who's at the forefront. He doesn't dictate to his assistants and let them handle that, and he steps in at the end, introduces himself to mom and dad, a month before National Signing Day. He's the guy, feet on the ground, logging those miles. And like I said, he just that confidence level, I think, resonates in his locker room. I think he's put together a really nice staff. And he's going nationwide with these recruiting efforts. They've signed guys from 11 different states here. Top 5 class. It's their first top 5 class in the modern recruiting era where we keep track of rankings like these. They put together a great group. They got 12 players in this class who are considered top 10 prospects at their position. 6 players are enrolled early, and we didn't see freshmen make a major impact on Penn State last year. I think it's hard not to see the Nittany Lions put some freshmen on the field this year, though, because this class really just blows a lot of what they've done in the past out of the water. And that's a credit to James Franklin and their success in recent years.
We always like interacting with our fans at our Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page. I wanted to ask you about Nebraska as well, but Bob Watson says, how about those Huskers? What can you tell us about their class? And I guess the question I would have for you on top of that is maybe twofold. First off, if Nebraska finished 4th in the Big Ten in recruiting, how close were they to Michigan? And secondly, you talked about Michigan before as kind of being the team maybe that had some momentum they were carrying from last year. Is Nebraska that team for next year that's carrying the momentum from what they did in 2018?
Well, I think there's room to be optimistic that they are that team carrying momentum, but we have to be cautious here. We got to see how they start out on the football field in September before we totally buy into them being that team. But I think the Facebook commenter should be feeling pretty good. It sounds like he's feeling good. They put together a big-time close in the recent weeks, and really since Frost took the job in December, we've talked about the connection that he established as the coach at Central Florida and how big the Sunshine State is for so many teams to be able to go to. They end up with 6 players from Florida after his arrival. Really like what they did also, getting 2 blue-chip players from the state of Texas, Cameron Jones, the safety, running back Maurice Washington. These were tight contests. They brought them in for official visits late, closed the deal. I mean, for them to finish 4th in the Big Ten and top 25 overall, that's an outcome I think a lot of us didn't see coming as the regular season wrapped up. There was a lot of wavering commits. There was a coaching staff under fire. And he has righted the ship very quickly from a recruiting standpoint. We talk about where Nebraska is in terms of, against Michigan and Penn State, Ohio State, kind of considered right now in that recruiting elite in the Big Ten. I think they have the ability to jump right into that group. They have the resources financially. They have the support system in place long-term for its coaching staff now. So everything's right there, but a really interesting Big Ten this year. Total gap between Ohio State and Penn State. When you look at the margin between Penn State and number 3 Michigan in the Big Ten standings based on composite scores, that margin was greater than the gap between Michigan at number 3 and very at the bottom, number 14 Northwestern. So Northwestern at 14 was closer to number 3 than Michigan at 3 was to number 2. So that tells you where Nebraska is. It was a large pack of teams this year. Nebraska, Michigan kind of at the forefront of that, but way up in another stratosphere, you had the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Penn State Nittany Lions.
Tyler, I know that Scott Frost and his staff has really made the state of Florida a priority, but where is he trying to expand that recruiting footprint as well? Is he hitting the West Coast at all? Where is he starting to expand his recruiting footprint?
Yeah, well, we've seen a pretty good engagement between on the recruiting trail between Nebraska and California. They had the Cali-Nebraska pipeline going for a while. And I think they did a nice job. That's always a place you want to continue to build your brand. And I think Adrian Martinez is somebody that proves California will be a spot of consideration for Scott Frost, because he was a 4-star quarterback who was committed to the Cal Golden Bears. And the way things turn out, he never expected to land in Lincoln. He got there for a visit following Frost's arrival, and they end up getting a really good quarterback to come in and maybe compete for reps as a freshman. And as I mentioned, they get 2 players from Texas. Not just 2 players, but 2 4-star guys in the closing days of the past recruiting cycle. So I think Texas, Florida, and California, Chris, you know as well as anybody, those are 3 really important places to recruit, and Nebraska off to a pretty good start.
Absolutely.
Tyler, we always appreciate your insights, appreciate everything through this run, through the recruiting period, and look forward to talking with you as we get closer and closer to getting back on the field for some more real football.
Sounds great. Thank you, guys.
All right, Tyler. Good stuff. That guy, he really worked hard over the past few weeks, and we appreciate his insight. I can't tell you, Chris, the thing I take away the most is 6 top 100 recruits for Ohio State, 6 top 100 recruits for Penn State,
and 0 for the rest of the Big Ten.
I mean, that's huge.
That's
right?
huge.
That
that's
Michigan
huge.
finished closer at number 3 to Northwestern than they did to Penn State at number 2. I mean, you talk about a balance of power shift in the Big Ten and this kind of stratification coming in here. Well, that's a big deal.
Well, that's why this 2018 season is really important for Harbaugh, because, when you look at the 2016 and 2017 recruiting classes, we all felt like the talent gap had closed. Now you have a disappointing 2017 season, and you look at what Penn State and Ohio State are recruiting, now that talent gap is starting to get even wider. So we got to have a good season in 2018 to make sure that gap doesn't get even wider.
I appreciate your candor on our look at the state of the program at Michigan. That might have been tough at times. Hopefully I didn't box you into too big of a corner. Want to point out, next week we have Michigan State, and we'll talk about Maryland as well. And these are two teams that obviously are having a lot of success on the basketball court, but how did that translate to the football field? We'll talk about that next week and look forward to more insight from you and from our viewers as well there on our Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page. Appreciate the folks on the other side of the glass for helping us out. It's been a lot of fun, my man. It is every week.
It is every week, man.
Let's do it again next week. Remember, you check us out on our Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page. Tuesdays, we're live at 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, on demand anytime. Back next week for Michigan State and Maryland as our State of the Program series continues. For Chris, I'm Sam. See ya.